Inspired by the fictional starship Millennium Falcon in Star Wars, Elon Musk took perhaps the biggest risk of his life. He built one of the most unique and unprecedented rockets ever in space history, which had a 90% chance of being a failure. But just its first launch in 2010 miraculously changed the course of space exploration and started a new era both technically, astronomically, and financially. That's the most talked about rocket, Falcon 9, launched for an unbelievable 354 times in just 14 years at the price of $70 million for each launch, to achieve something big, something seemingly impossible. In 2020, the Falcon 9 became the first commercial rocket ever to launch humans into orbit. And the next year, Falcon 9 launched a whopping 143 satellites into orbit in a single mission, setting a new record for the most deployed on one rocket. See, what started as a bold gamble now boasts over 99% success rate. While Star Wars provided a tiny inspiration to it, the root of the whole project came from a ridiculous idea: relocating mankind to Mars. But when Musk first came into the play, our space exploration was not even halfway there. During the space shuttle era, before Falcon 9, it cost about $10,000 to send just 1 kilogram into low Earth orbit. Naturally, the idea of building a city on Mars became ridiculously expensive to afford, somewhere between $100 billion and a whopping $10 trillion. So the main problem was not really technology, but not having any cost-effective technology. The solution was to stop using rockets only once. Regular rockets are mostly use and throw type single-use space shuttles. After just 90 seconds into takeoff, all the hard work and money that went into making them are just gone. But the history of building a reusable rocket was not smooth either. The first rocket boosters, adapted from missiles like the Titan II for the Apollo missions, were meant to be reusable, but extensive recycling and reusing were a problem. As a result, NASA had to choose the disposable Saturn V for Apollo due to cost concerns. They aimed for sustainability with the Space Shuttle, designed in the 1950s by Wernher von Braun, aiming for full reusability, but no luck. Refurbishing the shuttle after each flight involved a lot of work and expense, making it less economically practical. Because unlike commercial planes that quickly turn around for reuse, the shuttle needed careful disassembly and servicing, which was costly and not sustainable. Though they were hopeful about it during the planning stage, the shuttle's infrequent flights and high refurbishment costs outweighed their potential savings. Apart from NASA, some private companies like Blue Origin also started building their own reusable rockets. However, they were discouraged by NASA's experience with the Space Shuttle, seeing the difficulties and expenses in achieving true reusability, except for one California-based tech startup, SpaceX. In the early 2000s, it was incredibly tough for such a rising company to venture into orbital rocket launches, a completely new idea. Naturally, people had doubts, and no one invested in the project. That's why Elon Musk took some financial help from his other company, PayPal, to fund it all, which was a substantial amount though. But the problem was, SpaceX was already spending a lot of money as they were burning rocket fuel. That's the time when Musk realized that to achieve a cost-effective, reliable, and reusable rocket, the first stepping stone would be a highly capable engine, which will be cost-effective too, and that's how they started working on the Merlin engine. Elon Musk's vision for the Merlin was very clear: create a rocket engine that's both simple and affordable. Their journey into rocket engine production began with the Falcon 1 tests, and it led to the Merlin 1C, which powered their first successful launch. This engine later became crucial for early Falcon 9 flights, and today, SpaceX uses the Merlin 1D across all Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets. The chosen design features an open-cycle gas generator system fueled by cryogenic liquid oxygen and a refined form of kerosene. We call this refined kerosene the Rocket Propellant 1, or RP1. Unlike other space shuttles, more complex fuels like hydrogen are not used in this case because RP1 keeps operational costs cheaper. So this setup employs a gas generator to spin turbines using a small amount of fuel and oxidizer, ejecting exhaust gases from the side, or open cycle. By mixing fuel and oxygen pumps on a single drive shaft, the Merlin achieves mechanical simplicity without sacrificing efficiency. So, the Merlin engine runs on liquid fuel and oxidizer that ignites to produce thrust. Now, it's also used to propel the two-stage partially reusable rocket, Falcon 9, where both stages rely on SpaceX's Merlin engines. In the first stage, 9 Merlin engines provide thrust, each one generating 845 kilonewton of force. The rocket's payload section carries the Dragon capsule. This is the original reusable spacecraft that can bring large amounts of cargo back to Earth. Dragon comes in 2 types, Crew Dragon and Cargo Dragon. The names themselves talk a lot about what they are meant for. But did you notice that I said partially reusable about Falcon 9? Actually, SpaceX's approach to the rocket recovery was completely different from what NASA did with the shuttle. They focused on reusing the Falcon 9's first stage only by landing it back at the launch site using its engines. They decided early on not to try to recover the second stage, and logistically it makes sense. In addition to that, SpaceX also didn't use parachutes like NASA did with the shuttle's boosters. It worked for the shuttle boosters because they were smaller and lighter, but the Falcon 9 is much larger and heavier. To understand it better, the Falcon 9 launch generates enough thrust to lift about 33 elephants at once. Its booster stage needs to give a lot of speed to the upper stage so it can push the payload into orbit. This makes the booster fly very high and fast, reaching speeds over 8,000 kilometers per hour when it separates from the upper stage. If you look at the theory, the kinetic energy formula, which calculates energy from speed, shows that the booster has too much energy for parachutes to slow it down safely after it releases its payload into orbit. For that reason, SpaceX chose to land their boosters using only engines. Though you can say SpaceX could have used a mix of parachutes and the booster's engines to slow it down gradually, but Elon Musk prefers designs that are simpler and have fewer parts for cost cutting. Now, let me walk you through the whole procedure of takeoff, flight, and landing of the rocket for a better understanding. The Falcon 9 rocket's first stage has tanks for liquid oxidizer and fuel. On launch day, these are pumped into the Merlin engines, which ignite to start the rocket. About 1 minute and 10 seconds later, Falcon 9 goes faster than the speed of sound. At 1 minute and 18 seconds, the first stage engines stop, which means the main engine is cut off. At this point, the first stage separates from the rocket. Next, Dragon's protective nose cone is removed, which lets the spacecraft steer towards the space station. Dragon uses UHF communication to dock with the space station, where it stays for about 4 weeks. During this time, crew members unload cargo and get Dragon ready again to come back. To return to Earth and land safely, Falcon 9 follows a precise flight path. It does this automatically, using controlled moves. It lands upright using 3 kinds of flight controls: cold gas thrusters, grid fins, and reignited engines, so no parachutes are used. To do this, 8 nitrogen cold gas thrusters have been installed in the rocket near the top of its first stage. The engines of the Falcon 9 also act as a heat shield for free, protecting the booster when it re-enters the atmosphere. Plus, 4 grid fins make sure it lands accurately within 10 meters. If that's not all, the rocket uses an inertial navigation system and global positioning system, or GPS, to know where it is, how it's facing, and how fast it's moving in real time compared to a planned flight path. During a drone ship landing, the Falcon 9 booster briefly enters space upon crossing the Kármán line. After the second stage separation, the second stage of the spacecraft adjusts its trajectory using nitrogen thrusters and fires its main engine to slow down at a precise moment. This maneuver slows down the spacecraft, guiding it lower into the atmosphere for a safe re-entry. In the meantime, any remaining parts fall safely in the ocean, far from any residential area. The critical re-entry burn not only reduces velocity, but also creates a protective shield against the intense heat of re-entry, as it creates a striking jellyfish-like cloud of smoke and fire beneath the descending rocket. In addition to that, the rocket's blunt front deflects air particles, creating a protective layer that shields the spacecraft from intense heat. A heat shield made of special material that absorbs and spreads heat. And using aerodynamic grid fins, the booster glides down, slowing due to friction with the friction of air. Finally, the engines reignite for a precise zero-velocity touchdown on the floating platform. During this time, Falcon 9 opens 4 lightweight landing legs made from carbon fiber and aluminum. Each leg has a special part to soften hard landings. The whole landing gear stretches about 18 meters wide and weighs less than 2,100 kilograms. But all these settings have gone through a lot of trial and error throughout the 14 years and still continuing. The first ever Falcon 9 version 1 was smaller at 46 meters long and had 1.1 million pounds of thrust. Back at that time, SpaceX focused on launching successfully without reusing rockets, so it didn't have grid fins or landing legs for recovery. It had a square engine layout with 3 rows of 3 nozzles and completed 5 missions, including delivering a cargo Dragon capsule to the ISS, but then it was upgraded to Falcon 9 version 1.1. It was over 68 meters long and used the Merlin 1D engine with a circular octaweb layout, boosting thrust to 1.3 million pounds. SpaceX started testing controlled ocean landings and added landing legs in April 2014 and grid fins in January 2015 for precise landing through the atmosphere. But irony is, despite so many efforts, no version 1.1 rocket successfully landed. In June 2015, Falcon 9 had a mid-air failure and breakup, causing SpaceX to pause operations until they could redesign the booster. Then came the obvious, version 1.2, known as Falcon 9 Full Thrust. It was 2 meters longer than the previous model and produced 1.7 million pounds of thrust. SpaceX improved its power by cooling liquid oxygen and rocket fuel, increasing energy efficiency, and its first flight achieved the first successful landing of an orbital rocket booster at Cape Canaveral. This was a huge milestone for space exploration in the history of mankind. As a result, later, version 1.2 was taken for some adjustments to meet NASA's crew safety standards. Finally came the Falcon 9 Block 5, which was similar in size to its earlier version, but it has slightly more power, generating 1.8 million pounds of thrust. The main upgrade in this version was making the rocket booster originally reusable. Previously, SpaceX refurbished Falcon 9 full thrust boosters, but rarely reused them. And that way, the first launch using a refurbished Falcon 9 happened in March 2017, using a booster recovered over a year earlier. With Block 5, SpaceX improved the turbopumps in the Merlin engines to fix micro-cracking issues after launch and recovery. They also strengthened the rocket's grid fins by switching from aluminum to titanium, which are now the largest single pieces of forged titanium ever made despite being expensive. This upgrade helps the fins withstand re-entry heat better and improves control over the rocket's angle during flight. Apart from that, SpaceX now added a thermal protective coating to the Falcon 9 to reduce heat absorption and installed a new liquid-cooled heat shield at the base for engine and plumbing protection. Speaking of protection, some changes to the co-PVs, which store helium to maintain tank pressure during fuel use, were also made for preventing failures, because this was the reason behind previous Falcon 9 explosions. Originally designed for up to 10 launches, the Block 5's lifespan was extended to 15 launches by 2022. Some recent tests even suggested the Block 5 could potentially endure up to 60 launches and landings. In 2024, SpaceX has already performed 69 launches, amongst which booster landing went successful in all of them, but quite unfortunately, the latest launch has surprisingly become a failure. This is the first time a Falcon 9 Block 5 rocket has failed after 325 successful launches in a row. This West Coast Starlink launch was carrying 13 Generation 2 connectivity satellites. In the beginning, the launch program went well initially, with the first stage performing as expected. However, something unexpected happened right after that. A leak in the liquid oxygen caused the second stage engine to malfunction during its relight attempt, as there was an abnormal ice formation. Trying to fix the path using onboard thrusters was hard because of air resistance. As a result, the engine broke apart, and the satellites came out in an orbit where atmospheric drag might make them unusable. Now, SpaceX is investigating this extremely unexpected failure in the second stage. Meanwhile, the FAA also has kept further SpaceX launches on hold for now until they're sure they're safe to launch. However, Elon Musk welcomes the challenge as he says, "If you're not failing, you're not innovating." So far, the Falcon 9 rockets have been a major success, with a cost cutting of 30% overall. They already have more than 90 scheduled launch programs for the rest of this year, 2025, 2026, and up to 2030. On top of that, SpaceX is now thriving for more upgrades so they can lessen the cost even more and take the success rate to complete 100%. What do you think? Can they do it or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more insights insights into the future of space exploration. And if you are also interested to know more about the latest Falcon 9 fail, click on this video.